it's time to open our hearts to the needy. And the first question we want to ask ourselves is, who are the needy? Who are the needy? And Jesus tells us very clearly the parable of the Good Samaritan. And he tells us first there was a priest that walked along the road, and when he walked along the road, he saw a man that was badly injured and was bleeding because he was robbed by bandits, beaten up, and left to die in the desert. Every hill looks the same like others. There is very little water, and a man that is lying down, if no one helps that man, I can imagine if I were to be injured and no one comes to help me, I'll probably die of dehydration. Okay? Because you can't just easily get yourself out of that wilderness. So this man who was beaten up literally has no way of saving himself. But Jesus tells a story. There was a priest that came along. Now the priests, obviously you know, are involved in the work of the temple. So as they were doing the work, and he was moving from, at Jericho to Jerusalem, and he was on his way for his official duty, he saw this man. What did this priest do? He had the calling. He had been doing official duties. And right now, there is this man who was left bleeding. Now, the man who was left bleeding, the Bible did not tell us what race he was, what nationality he was. Okay? It only tells who the three individuals that walked past. One is the priest, one is the Levite. And guess what? Who are these two? They are Jews. Okay, you cannot be a priest, you cannot be a Levite if you are not a Jew. And that's why it specifically says the third person that came along is none of these two, it is a Samaritan. Likely the person who is bleeding, my assumptions are likely he is a fellow Jew. Because the story is made more drastic when it says, here it is, a Samaritan who has no warm relationships with Jews, who has always been despised by the Jews, now reaches out to a man who is hurting. So the priest came by and saw this man, and what did the scripture says? He walked on the other side. He's supposed to be a man of God. But instead of reaching out to a need, he feels that this may actually cause, me to be defiled. So I'm not going to help this man. And probably this man, has done something wrong in his life. He deserved probably to die. There's people who reason this way. Oh, they are in this situation. You know why they are in a problem and need? Because they deserve it. They didn't do a lot of things in their young life, right? They are in such a difficult moment. They landed themselves, in human trafficking, or they are a victim of, and they're now as a prostitute because they are bad people. And when they need, they deserve to have that HIV. They deserve to, get all these diseases. You and I do not know the back. But in order to us to stay ourselves away from them, we say that probably they deserve it. It could be in the mind of the priest. He probably deserved it. Let him die. And this man of God walked on the other side and neglected the dying individual. It was a very vivid, story that Jesus was telling. Because he was telling especially to a very learned man who asked him the question, who is my neighbor? Then Jesus followed on. It says here was a Levite. Now the Levites are those who are very strong students of the law. Okay, the Levites are the one who would be scribes. Okay, they would study the law very well. They are good students, and they're very good teachers of the law, the Torah, and all that is required of them to study. And so they spend many hours dissecting the meaning of this word, this verb, what is the background, what is the these words is made of two words, and they can give you a lot of explanation. With all the study, and he came past this man who was wounded and dying. The Levite The scripture says again, he walked on the other side. It is so easy for us to neglect a need with all the learning, with all the calling that we have. Sometimes we see videos that are posted up on YouTube that are horrifying. I remember seeing one, you know, it was just a camera that was on an alley, on how an old lady was actually robbed by, a robber, and she was wounded. And people were just going out early in the morning for the market. They would see her and they would walk on the other side and neglect her. And a couple of people did that. So much so that when finally an Indian man came and saw this woman, old Chinese woman, on the floor, called the ambulance. By the time they took her to the hospital, it was already too late. She has lost too much blood. And do you know what? The ones who passed by, from what I could see from that camera, were actually Chinese. There was a Chinese old lady that was down there, and it was the Chinese people who stayed away and didn't want to help her and get into trouble at all. Until this Indian man came along and called up the ambulance to come and assist this old woman. These are things that are still happening today. But the Samaritan who has been despised by the Jews, the Samaritan who is supposed not to have any godly training, the Samaritans who have been stopped from going to the temple and have been involved in the synagogue worship, the Samaritans whom the Jews would not have any business dealings at all, came and saw this man who was lying on the road bleeding. The Bible tells us that he saw this man, and the Samaritan came to this man and poured oil and wine and bandaged up his wounds. He got literally his hands dirtied, and then put him on a mule and sent him to an inn and stayed that night with him. The next day, he gave some money to the innkeeper, and he says, take care of this man until he's healed. He says, I've got to go out of my business. When I return, if it has used up more money, I will pay up the balance for you, to you. A very beautiful picture of a man who has no relationships with a total stranger, and yet crossed racial barriers, crossed religious barriers, and helped a man who is in need. And that is what we are called to do, to open our hearts to the needy. So, Jesus asked a question, who is your neighbor? Who actually obeyed and helped? He says it's a Samaritan man. He didn't say it was the priest. He didn't say it was a Levite. He said it was a Samaritan man who helped this injured person. Who is our neighbor? Our neighbor is anyone who is in need. You know, sometimes we think that the needy are only those who are poor. The poor are needy. That's true. But who else are the ones who are needy? The needy people, you don't actually have to go far to look for them. They are where you stay. They are people in the places where you work with. There are people that are around this community. So let me give you some examples of who are the needy ones. And this barely scratches the surface. There are those who are needy because they are struggling in their relationships. You know that there are individuals within your contact who actually are struggling in their marriage, and they have thoughts in their cross their minds so many times to just get a divorce and to walk away. There are many people who look very normal. They dress normally like you and I, go to the normal routines, but they are having a turmoil on the inside because situations at home is so bad. They can't talk to one another. There are individuals that are all around us who are actually struggling with the difficulty of raising up the children. Some parents, you know, some are very gracious, they understand their children, but some, right, they just cannot handle children, you know, that are disobedient children that don't. and they get all worked up. The blood pressure goes up. They use force, they use violence, and that's why we have children who are physically abused by their parents. There are people who are needy, who are struggling with trying to break the vices in their lives. Some are struggling with pornography. It is a hidden sin that they dare not tell anyone. Some are struggling with smoking habits, and drinking habits. But they have no one to help them. The individuals who are in a lot of pain, they have lost a loved one, and they slip from just normal sadness. Psychologists say that if you lose a loved one, you will normally be sad, and that's natural, very sad for 2 weeks. The most, you go to 3 or 4 weeks. But if it goes beyond that, if the sadness lingers on, and it causes you to be unable to do anything, there is no desire to go to work, there is no desire to meet up with friends, there is only, what it says, to recoil and be alone. You no longer find joy in the things that you used to enjoy doing. Let's take, for example, okay, a person enjoys doing gardening. Oh, loves to work the soil and put fertilizer, pull out the weeds, and cut off all the brown leaves and so forth. Just spend a lot of hours, and something tragic happens. And after a long time, you find no longer any joy wanting to go back to the garden, something that used to give you a lot of joy before. Okay? And you don't want to touch any gardening any longer. Or some, would be very, you receive a lot of thrill from outdoor sports, right? Going for camping and adventure. And your friends try to pull you out of the darkness, and you go for one time and you don't enjoy it any longer. So there is a reverse reaction. You no longer enjoy the things. What happens is a person, when he goes through prolonged sadness, psychology says actually more than 2 weeks, you actually slip into mild depression. Do you know what is the normal statistics of every country on the area of depression? The base minimum. Okay, it seems that depression is something that is going to increase more and more in our modern society. In some countries it's higher, but generally it says on average 10% of the population are in depression. That is very high. Out of 10 people, there is one individual that is going to depression. If that statistics is true, we have about 100, close to 200 people here. If the statistics is true, there's about 20 individuals that are depressed right here sitting. But you don't tell anyone. You feel the sadness. You get up without any motivation. You feel only, that, there are problems that are here, that is, and you are so stressed up and so forth. There is sometimes no way of escape. We need to say there are needs all around us. There are needs around us. And it says there are people who are struggling with sicknesses. Not only the person who is going through a sickness, having a problem, the people, the family who takes care of them also go through a lot of stress. Because if you have an individual, if you have a parent you've got to take care, right, who is bedridden, the family is also stressed out. So there are people who are in need. For us, we know the Lord, there is an avenue for us to reach out to God. But does not mean that we do not need the help of one another to minister and to strengthen and encourage. We see that those who are poor, who are trying to make ends meet, who do not know how to, make the next payment in their mortgage, or what is going to happen when the next term comes and there are school books that needs to be bought. There are some people who really struggle with poverty. The Bible tells us, Jesus' words, it says, look, do not say there is 4 months more unto the harvest. Lift up your eyes and see that the fields are white unto harvest. God may God open our eyes to see the needs that are around us. Now, what is it that stops us from reaching out to help people who are in need? One thing is this, is first of all, we don't see the need. We only see the good side of life. We only see the things that looks very normal. Oh, they're like us, you know. They dress like us. They go to work in the same office. They get the job done, right? Most of the time. And we see only on the outside. When we don't look beyond the struggles of the soul, we don't see it. Or sometimes we don't get involved to places whereby there is people who are really struggling. We were just talking, or yesterday Pastor Sheila was sharing the message at the church anniversary. A message that they reminded the people. They say is that remember who you are before. She was telling us, and some of you have been reminded last time. Remember how you started.